Today in class we continue with 1.2 notes in the student journal. We worked on page 10. We just worked on reflections. Reflection over the x-axis and reflection over the y-axis. Now, when you're reflecting over the x-axis, this is when you're going to take your entire function and multiply by -1. And that's what it says right here. Multiplying the outputs, or y, or your function, by -1 changes their sign. So for example, let's say our original function was f of x equals 2x plus 3. If I wanted to reflect that over the x-axis, what I would need to do is, to get my new function, which I'm just going to call g of x, I need to take my old function and multiply it by -1. Okay? Well, what that ends up looking like is -1 times my old function. And then I'm just going to distribute. And my new function would be g of x equals -2x plus 3. Now, to give you another example, let's just look at another example. Let's look at absolute value. Let's say our original function was f of x equals the absolute value of x plus 1 and then -2. Again, if I want to reflect that over the x-axis, to get my new function, I would need to take -1 times my old function, which will look like this. -1 times the absolute value of x plus 1 minus 2. And you are going to distribute. You're not going to distribute within the absolute value because those are not parentheses. But remember, it's almost like there's a 1 in front of here, and you'll multiply that and this by the -1. And so your final answer ends up being negative absolute value of x plus 1 and then plus 2. Now, if you go back to page 10, when you're reflecting over the y-axis is when you change your x value first. Multiplying the inputs, or your x's, by -1 first changes the sign. The example I gave in class is, if you think of a basic graph, if I had the point 1, 2 as my original point, and I wanted to reflect that over the y-axis, that point would end up at -1, 2. Notice the only thing that changed was the x. And so that's why we're just changing the x's to -x, or multiplying just the x by -1 to cause that horizontal flip. So going back to our original function, let's say f of x was equal to 2x plus 3. And I want to reflect this over the y-axis. What that means I need to do is, to get my new function, I need to change all the x's in my original function to a -x. What that will look like is I will have 2 times, but instead of x, I'm going to change it to -x, and then plus 3. And then when I simplify that, my final equation will be -2x plus 3. All right? So if we're over the horizontal, or over the y-axis, you end up changing your x to -x first, then simplifying. Now, when it comes to absolute value, this looks a little different. Okay, so let's go back to our original absolute value function. What you're going to do is you are going to do the same thing. To get your new function, you are going to change your old function. You're going to change all of your x's to -x. Now, what that looks like with absolute values, it would look like this. The absolute value of -x plus 1, minus 2. Okay? Now, what we want to do is, we don't want to leave this as -x inside here. What we're going to do is, we are going to factor out a -1 from both of those terms. And what that means is, I'm dividing both of these things by -1. Okay? But now, when you have a multiplication problem within absolute value, you can actually split that up into 2 pieces. I can do the absolute value of -1 times the absolute value of x minus 1. But then if you ask yourself, what is the absolute value of -1? It's just 1. And so my final answer would be the absolute value of x minus 1 minus 2. Now, I know that seems like a lot of work, and you do not have to do that much work each time. I want you to compare the original function to the transformed function, and notice what's different. When you do a horizontal reflection, or a reflection over the y-axis, The only thing that changes with absolute value is the sign inside goes from the original sign to its opposite sign. If you just remember that pattern, that's good enough. The work will always be the same, so if you look at what has actually changed, you can just use the pattern. The assignment for tonight, we just added on to Friday's assignment. It was page 16 again, and we just added on 11 through 16.